Yeah. So I think that right there is the most important, right? Because ultimately, if we are going to do a better job for the customer, thus a better job for the company, we have to advocate for our teams, our budgets, right? There's so much we could do. I'm sure you have a list this long of if I got more resources, here's what I would do with it, right? But as long as you're looked upon as a cost center, the emphasis is how do we contract without losing too much service quality? That's the mentality versus how do I pour more resources in because I can see a greater return, right? That's the advocacy that we have to be on. And so I love it. I love the co-pilot strategy, right? It's amazing. I did that. I wrote a message to a friend of mine that has pretty severe ADHD. And I asked, can you translate this? Because you didn't want it to be offensive to them. You didn't want them to feel like they were taking it as they had done something wrong. Like, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, that's beautiful. I wouldn't have thought of that, right?
It's funny. I love that. I have a friend whose husband also has some ADHD going on, and he only wants the headlines, right? And then he'll ask questions, but if you give him too many details, you lose them. And so while I certainly would never diagnose anyone at my own company, but you have people that maybe like glaze over, right? You want to tell them this whole story, but they don't need that whole story. And so I even tried it a couple times at that of like, here's the story I want to tell. What are the headlines? And how do I say, hey, here's the three things that are going on. What do you want to know more about? Because sometimes, again, that's that audience, right? Like we tend to love context, love details. Tell me more. The more you tell me, the more I understand and I'm invested. That's not how everyone's brains work. And so that's definitely been also a really helpful tool with AI is really just how to have different conversations.
Yeah. If you really put in, I am meeting with a C-suite executive with ADHD with a driver personality. And I'm only going to have 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
That's the way you've got to think. I love
yeah.
this. This is, we have to think about how we are successful at every level, right? Whether it's making somebody chuckle, I love that, right? Or it's how we're dealing internally. So here's another thing. You call it the never say no philosophy that builds strategic influence. So we're talking again about internal communications here. Tell us the extension. I love where we're going here, but like we're talking about how do we make more powerful internal communications to create more success overall?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that's so important for customer experience, customer service is we need to have a seat at the table. Sometimes we can be forgotten, right? Because we're often almost like the post implementation. It's like we sort of get I don't want to call it fallout, but whatever the reaction to or whatever the result usually flows through customer service one way, shape, or form. But we're not always necessarily needed on the build stage. But if we're not included, things will get missed. And then when we get to the result for the reaction stage, all of a sudden we're like, whoa, we didn't know this would happen. We didn't know this would happen. And so, but to be invited to the party, you can't be the person that's always saying, no, 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 or I don't like that, or that's not going to work, right? You have to be the person that's saying yes. And kind of how I said a little bit before, and tell me more. Did you think about this? What is the objective? So for my team and myself, like we show up strategizing our way to yes, figuring out the process to yes. So, but again, we do really try to ask those, what's the objective, right? Because we know the objective will be good and true. Sometimes the process is one where we can have a little bit of wiggle. But if we stay if someone's like, hey, we want to come in, we want to change the process and we want to do 1, 2, 3. Well, if we know that's not going to work, we can't just say, no, that process won't work. We have to say, okay, what are we trying to do here? What's the objective? And then there's much more well received for like, okay, if that's the objective, what do you think about this process? Because here's our concerns with this one. So I think we want to stay invited. We're very lucky at Sort of Simmons Vetting. We are invited. We are involved early and often. But I do think a lot of that is attributed to how the team shows up, right? We show up as business partners that only want to help, achieve your objective. But we are also going to be strategic with you. We're going to call out the risks. We're going to ask questions. And so that's worked really well for us is we just don't ever show up looking to say no. We always show up looking to say yes, but we are going to ask a lot of questions on the way there.